Bien, bonsoir. Je vous propose de prendre place pour ceux qui sont debout, pour ceux qui peuvent encore en trouver. On va pouvoir commencer cette up conférence, alors un peu exceptionnelle évidemment, déjà en nature, en raison de la présence rare et donc précieuse de Naomi Klein ce soir, et puis également une up conférence un peu exceptionnelle parce qu'on est vendredi soir, parce qu'on est à la fin des vacances de la Toussaint, parce qu'on est peut-être pour certains avait prévu de partir en week-end prolongé. Mais vous êtes là ce soir et je pense que vous avez tout à fait raison, vous avez bien fait parce qu'on va vivre un moment sans doute extrêmement inspirant, extrêmement important. Donc merci à toutes et à tous d'être venus aussi nombreux. Je m'appelle William Eland Goldsmith et j'ai le plaisir de représenter le mouvement Up et d'animer l'équipe du mouvement Up. Alors certains vous les croisez toutes les semaines, Simon, Charlotte, Laure, Abel et puis également Juliette du groupe SOS qui était là ce soir pour nous donner un petit coup de main. Et donc on est ravis de vous accueillir. Alors avant de vous en dire davantage sur le mouvement Up, et je serai très court, promis, là c'est vraiment un engagement que je prends devant vous. Je vais demander à Antoinette Gull de bien vouloir me rejoindre sur scène. Donc Antoinette, on peut applaudir Antoinette. Antoinette, donc tu es adjointe à la maire de Paris en charge de l'économie sociale et solidaire, de l'innovation sociale et de l'économie circulaire. Et tu es un soutien fidèle des Hub Conférences et ce soutien nous honore et on t'en remercie. Je vais te laisser le soin tout simplement d'ouvrir la conférence et je vous retrouve après le mot d'Antoinette pour vous en dire plus sur le mouvement Up. Merci Antoinette.
Merci William. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Alors, je vais commencer par saluer très très chaleureusement Naomi. Elle nous fait le plaisir d'être à Paris parmi nous et je voulais lui dire que c'était un immense honneur pour nous de la recevoir. Alors quand je dis pour nous, c'est pour nous, pour les HubConf et pour tout le monde de l'économie sociale et solidaire que nous espérons ici fédérer. Alors c'est un très très grand plaisir de vous accueillir particulièrement ici dans ce lieu qui est l'emblème de la solidarité, le Palais de la Femme. Mais c'est aussi tout simplement un plaisir de vous accueillir à Paris parce que je crois que depuis que vous avez commencé à écrire, Naomi, eh bien, à votre manière, vous changez le monde. Moi, j'ai été particulièrement marquée de je crois que c'était votre premier ouvrage, Nos logos, la tyrannie des marques. Toutes celles et tous ceux dans la salle qui ont mon âge, j'allais dire lever le doigt, mais ça n'est pas ça, toutes celles et tous ceux qui ont mon âge ont effectivement grandi et milité avec vous parce que c'est en emboîtant votre pas que nous nous sommes retrouvés, chère Naomi, à militer dans des mouvements anti-pub, à nous investir dans des AMAP, à nous intéresser à l'altermondialisme et à construire cet autre monde que nous appelons de nos voeux. Donc ça, c'était en 2001. Aujourd'hui, vous allez encore plus loin avec ce livre qui s'appelle « Dire non ne suffit plus ». Vous allez encore plus loin parce que vous nous montrez que cette tyrannie des marques que vous nous aviez exposée il y a 15 ans, eh bien cette tyrannie des marques a comme un virus contaminé le monde politique. C'est ça que vous nous montrez dans ce livre. Et vous nous montrez que non seulement c'est l'économie et la société qui avaient été mises en danger précédemment par les marques, mais aujourd'hui c'est la politique qui est prise en otage de cette même stratégie. C'est ce que le livre montre. Et pour chacun et chacune d'entre nous qui considérons que l'élection de Trump a été un choc, un autre mot qui est cher à Naomi, eh bien en fait elle nous explique dans ce livre que non, ça n'est pas un choc, c'est juste la continuité poussée à son paroxysme, j'allais dire jusqu'à l'écœurement, de ce qu'est le système hyper consumériste dans lequel on est. Alors lorsque j'ai dit ça, vous vous dites mais quel pessimisme? Eh bien en fait pas du tout, parce que Naomi Klein a quelque chose d'exceptionnel, c'est qu'elle est extrêmement optimiste et vous le verrez dans son livre. Son livre est un véritable appel à l'action et absolument pas un document pessimiste, donc pour ça je l'en remercie. Alors à Paris, nous depuis 2014, nous essayons, je ne vais pas être très longue William, mais à Paris depuis 2014, nous essayons de construire cette société solidaire que vous appelez de vos voeux. Nous essayons avec deux combats principaux qui ne vous auront pas échappé, qui est l'écologie et la solidarité. Et pour ça, moi, j'ai en charge la transformation de l'économie pour une économie qui soit plus respectueuse des hommes, des femmes et de la planète. Je voulais saluer Jean-Pierre Corsia, qui est élu du 11e arrondissement, donc qui lui joue à domicile et qui a aussi en charge cette belle économie qu'est l'économie sociale et solidaire. Nous venons d'ouvrir le mois de l'économie sociale et solidaire, c'était le 1er novembre, donc il y a quelques jours. Dans quelques jours, lundi, nous accueillons à Paris le grand sommet du social business de Mohamed Younous, que nous allons pour la première fois accueillir à Paris. Donc tous ces changements nous amène nous aussi à espérer, à vouloir mettre en mouvement la société pour avoir cette transition économique qui nous amènera aussi la transition écologique et la transition démocratique. Alors Naomi, c'est en mon nom, c'est aussi au nom d'Anne Hidalgo, mais c'est aussi au nom de toutes celles et tous ceux qui aujourd'hui ont envie de changer le monde que je vous dis, ma très chère Naomi Klein, bienvenue à Paris.
Merci infiniment Antoinette. Alors je vous l'avais annoncé, je vais vous dire quelques mots, mais vraiment très rapides sur le mouvement Up. Le mouvement Up, on a une promesse qui est assez simple, mais qu'on a à cœur de renouveler au quotidien. C'est de donner les clés au plus grand nombre, à chacun de pouvoir comprendre le monde d'aujourd'hui, un monde qui est forcément de plus en plus complexe, mais également de livrer les clés pour que chacun puisse contribuer activement, à l'échelle de ses moyens, à la transition socio-écologique. Alors comment est-ce qu'on le fait au mouvement Up ? On a mis en place des outils, des événements par exemple comme les Up conférences qui nous réunissent ce soir et qui en sont alors, si je ne dis pas de bêtises, 109e édition, avec chaque semaine cette volonté d'inviter celles et ceux qui font le monde de demain, qui font l'innovation, que ce soit des personnalités prestigieuses ou sinon des porteurs de projets qui ont besoin de se faire connaître mais qui ont beaucoup de potentiel. On considère aux Hub Conférences qu'ils ont toute leur place dans nos événements. Les Hub Conférences, ce sont les événements, mais on a également des productions, que ce soit à travers le magazine Up le Mag, que ce soit à travers des vidéos que vous pouvez retrouver sur notre site up-conférence.fr, que ce soit à travers des témoignages qu'on va retranscrire. L'idée pour nous, c'est de diffuser au-delà simplement des lieux de conférence, mais également de faire en sorte que chacun puisse se saisir de ces témoignages précieux qui sont partagés par nos intervenants. Et puis enfin, le mouvement Up, c'est également un réseau social. Je pense que pas mal d'entre vous y sont déjà inscrits. Un réseau social qui réunit 130 000 membres avec la possibilité pour chacun de poursuivre les échanges au-delà des conférences, de pourquoi pas trouver à proximité de chez soi une association qui a besoin d'aide, qui a besoin de compétences, et c'est la possibilité de pouvoir s'engager. L'engagement, selon nous, ça passe également par des formations et on est fiers aux conférences de lancer une offre de formation pour celles et ceux qui souhaitent en savoir plus sur ces dynamiques de transition socio-écologique. Et donc, si vous vous retrouvez dans l'ensemble de ces outils, vous êtes bienvenus ici au Mouvement Up. On est très contents de vous y accueillir. Un dernier petit mot peut-être pour faire un petit moment de pub sur ce qu'on propose. On a lancé un appel à projet la semaine dernière pour des jeunes entrepreneurs sociaux en herbe et je suis convaincu qu'il y en a dans la salle. Un appel à projet qui vise à les accompagner derrière pendant 6 mois pour les aider à se structurer, à grandir, à éviter peut-être certaines erreurs. Donc si ça vous intéresse, connectez-vous sur le site up-campus.org. Je tenais également à remercier chaleureusement le Palais de la Femme et toutes les équipes qui nous accueillent ce soir. Je crois que c'est un lieu qui est assez extraordinaire et c'est la première fois qu'on est accueillis dans ces murs et on est heureux et ravis d'y être. Et puis je tenais également à remercier l'équipe d'Actes Sud avec qui on a préparé cette conférence. Ils nous ont fait confiance, merci infiniment et on est ravis de pouvoir travailler avec vous. Voilà, je crois que j'ai pas été trop long. Si vous voulez en savoir plus, up-conférence.fr, les réseaux sociaux, évidemment. Et puis, il y a certaines personnes qui nous suivent également par Facebook Live, donc je les salue à distance. Olivier, c'est à nous. Alors Olivier, toi, tu es un complice de la première heure des Hub Conférences. Du coup, merci d'être présent. Olivier, tu es passionné d'innovation, tu es passionné d'échange, de partage. Tu es à l'initiative d'un super projet qui s'appelle Co-gitons, qui se propose en fait d'organiser des expéditions dans des lieux qui sont un peu disruptifs. La campagne notamment, on n'y pense pas souvent, mais la campagne c'est un lieu essentiel et de ressourcement. Et tu proposes aux personnes, aux participants, de pouvoir se reconnecter avec ces principes forts de coopération. Merci à toi d'être l'animateur de cette conférence. Alors, exercice pas facile en plus pour Olivier, parce que ça sera in English. Voilà. Donc ça, c'est un challenge pas des moindres. Et puis, évidemment, Olivier appellera Naomi sur scène dans quelques secondes. Mais au nom des Hub Conférences, je tenais à remercier Naomi de sa présence ce soir. On est extrêmement honorés. Vous aurez vu son livre est à la vente derrière la salle. Naomi restera un petit peu pour pouvoir dédicacer éventuellement certains livres. On vous demandera, vu que vous êtes très nombreux, d'observer une forme de discipline lorsque vous irez acheter le livre pour pas que ça soit la cohue. Mais on vous fait confiance. On sait qu'on est tous très bienveillants ici. Voilà. J'en ai fini. Excellente soirée à toutes et à tous. Olivier, c'est à toi.
Merci, William. Merci William. Je suis ému d'être là. Effectivement, je suis le fondateur de Co-gitons.fr et j'aime les rencontres conviviales. Donc je suis touché de faire une rencontre dans la grande famille de l'ESS, là à 500, 600 avec Naomi. Et je suis ému aussi parce que I will speak mainly in English. So thank you for the English speaker to be tolerant with my accent. And thank you also for the French speaker to do the best to follow the conversation. We are lucky because Naomi speaks also French, so maybe we will switch to French somehow. It's important because actually we are here in a very particular place. Le Palais de la Femme is belonging to l'Armée du Salut. And every day, every night, more than 60 women, young women and women are living here, hosted in a safe place in order to move to their next chapter. And precisely with Naomi today, we will see what could be the next chapter at a global level. We are here at Palais de la Femme and we are on the 3rd of November. So it's an historical day for me because it's the first day that I meet Naomi. But not just for me, actually it's a particular day for Roosevelt, who has been elected in 36, and Clinton, who has been elected the 3rd of November, 92. It has been an even more historical day for Amartya Sen, the Nobel Economic Prize, who invested his life for development and well-being as indicator. Amartya Sen was born in the 3rd of November. Just to say that it's a very particular day. I hope you will enjoy your night. Thank you, Naomi, to be our host. Welcome.
Merci Olivier et merci Antoinette pour cette introduction magnifique. Chaque fois que je viens en France, je promets que la prochaine fois que je viens en France, je vais parler en français et chaque fois, je réalise que ça serait un désastre. Alors je vais parler en anglais, je m'excuse. But I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your Friday night. There's still a long night ahead. You'll have time to have fun. But I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank UP Conferences, and I want to Movement UP, and I want to thank most of all my wonderful publisher, Sud, who I've been with since No Logo. There's not a lot of publishers in the world that I've been able to stay with for the entire journey of my publishing life. And they're a very special house, so I'm so glad to still be with them.
Thank you, Naomi. We know you as an activist, as an international bestseller author. We know you for No Logo, for the Chuck Doctrine, for that changed everything. You are also a journalist, and your articles go through The Guardian, the New Yorker, the New York Times, Le Monde. So definitely you are a human doing, but you are also a human being. So my first question is, how do you feel? You were in Netherlands, you were in Italy this morning, now in France, in 3 days in Spain. How do you feel, basically?
I miss my son. Usually I try not to be away from him for more than 5 days, and I passed that mark yesterday, and so I get a little shaky.
What is his name?
His name is Toma.
How old is he?
He is 5.
Okay. He's on the internet? Not yet? We don't know.
We try to keep him off the internet. But
Thank you, Naomi, to to be here. May I ask to the audience, how do they feel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Excited. More than... could you describe a little more? Who said excited?
Well, I'm excited to be able to meet you and Naomi in front and to hear about this new book I don't know yet about.
Merci Julien. How do you feel? Terrible.
I feel terrible, yeah. Why? Not to do with this book, just in general.
To read the book, you feel terrible?
No, not about the state of the world. You know,
Yeah.
It's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, mixed feeling, excitation and also sadness or angriness. How do you feel? Why did you decide to invest your Friday night with us? Who has already read the book of Naomi, Non ne suffit plus?
It's not out yet, so...
We have privileged person. Okay. And who has read No Logo and the others? Okay. So are you curious? Are you grateful? Why?
For all that you do, right? Because it inspires everybody else to have the courage to do what they can do.
Thank you.
Excitation, gratefulness. What else? The idea is to nourish our feeling of belonging to the same tribe. So don't hesitate to share what is living for you now. Optimistic.
I say optimistic because otherwise what's the point of getting up in the morning and spending a Friday night here? Actually, there are people who are trying to move on. So let's be optimistic, and we are quite a number. Optimistic.
What is your name?
Christelle.
Merci Christelle. Okay, last one. Enthusiastic, why?
Even if it's a terrible period, I'm enthusiastic because it's a good day, a great day. I come from a great forum organized by Notre Affaire à tous, with a lot of people who are in movement for climate justice, and there are a lot of victory. It's enthusiastic to be here now with you.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so we have enthusiasm, curiosity, and we have also some questions about what is going on with this world. Actually, a few months ago, a new particular character showed up, some kind of Frankenstein guy. Some name him as a Frankenstein. Why it is important for you that we clearly understand why Trump is a symptom of the system's evolution?
Well, first, thanks for everybody who chimed in there, and I think probably many of us feel all of those things at different points in any given day. I know I do. It's hard to be any one thing these days, and I know I feel a huge range of emotions just reading the news every day. But I think as the young woman who said she felt enthusiasm illustrated is that the best way to get out of our pits of despair and hopelessness is to get in rooms filled with other people who are doing things to change the world. That's certainly the only thing that ever works for me. And it's the only thing that is one of the things that I love about being a journalist, is that I have an excuse to go around immersing myself in movements and people who are on the front lines of all kinds of life and death struggles, and they always put things in perspective. I felt this real sense of urgency to put Trump in the context of neoliberal history, in the context of the rise of corporate power that I've been documenting for a long time, and in the context of a worldview that is based on domination of other people, based on race and gender and sexuality, based on physical beauty and bizarre standards thereof, and based on domination of the earth itself, a worldview that is based on limitless taking, grabbing. I call him the grabber in chief. You know, he grabs women, he wants to grab the oil, he wants to grab everything with a total sense of entitlement and impunity. So he's an exaggerated version of the worst that our culture produces, but he is not outside the culture. And I have to say, you know, when I come to Europe, I don't want to reinforce feelings of European smugness, you know. One of the things that I think is most dangerous about Trump is that he lowers the bar so much that everybody looks good in comparison to Trump, you know, and that can really reinforce a sense of complacency. You know, I'm Canadian, I'm dual American and Canadian citizenship, but you know, I know that in Canada, our Prime Minister dressed up as Superman for Halloween, as you may have seen. It takes very little to look like Superman these days, let me tell you. You just have to not be Trump. So it was important for me to put Trump in context because I saw a lot of people using this word shock again and again to describe him, describe everything he did. And I know from my previous work on shock, and you know, many of you read the shock doctrine, that when we are in a state of shock, we are very vulnerable. That shock is the gap. This is the way I define shock. It's the gap that opens up between event and narrative. It's the gap that opens up between something that happens and our ability to understand that event. Then we go into shock. And that is when we are at our most vulnerable. And I think Trump is very good. He's like a shock machine at keeping us in a state of shock. And lots of political commentators thrive off this narrative that this is totally unheard of, right? And it's incredibly dangerous because of the moral relativism that sets in. And if we've never seen this before, then of course George W. Bush is a great guy. I mean, haven't we all seen his reputation be resurrected? So these are some of the reasons I wanted to put Trump in context, mainly to get us out of shock fast so that we can strategize. And he's a global phenomenon. It's not just that we're all impacted by what he does on climate change or nuclear war, we are. But also he's part of a global phenomenon that looks different in every country. Marine Le Pen is not the same as Donald Trump, but they share some traits in common. And there are versions of Trump and Le Pen in every country right now that are rising because we are in a global world that is impacting us all differently, but impacting us all, right? And so we need international strategies and international conversations to confront that.
Actually, to put Trump into this context, referring to your first book, No Logo, you were talking about Holo brand and how from the 80s and 90s brand conquer new spaces. Could you share with us how Holo brand is accurate to describe Trump phenomenon?
Right, So what No Logo was about was not just corporations marketing themselves a lot, right? No Logo was about this change that happened in the corporate world in the 1990s when this mania took hold in the corporate world which shifted the structure of the multinational corporation from the traditional one of companies seeing themselves as producers of products and deliverers of services that they branded and marketed to differentiate themselves from their competitors, to seeing themselves primarily as manufacturer of ideas, lifestyles, identities, right? For which the products were largely incidental. So the company that really that really led the way on this shift was Nike. They were the first product-based company that didn't own a single factory, right? They outsourced absolutely everything. And they said, we are not a running shoe company. We are not an athletics company. We are a company about the idea of transcendence through sports, okay? And because they didn't own any of their factories, they were able to spend much more money than their rivals on marketing, and they produced the best marketing the world had ever seen, right? But if we think, so they're hollow in the sense that they had divested themselves from their manufacturing base. And this is relevant to Trump and Le Pen and all of the right-wing populists because, of course, part of what they're tapping into is the anger of that deindustrialization, right? The irony with Trump is that he participated in it as a hollow brand himself, right? So like Nike, Trump's act of manufacturing is not building buildings. He started out that way. He used to be a traditional real estate developer. But in the 90s, really not in the 90s, in the early 2000s, when he got this reality show, which was the most incredible marketing campaign of all time, he realized that he could now become a hollow brand, which meant that his act of manufacturing was the act of projecting the Trump brand into the world, and then he could sell the Trump brand to other people to build buildings and golf courses and resorts, right? So his act of manufacturing is just creating the mythology around his brand, selling the idea around his brand. That creates value that he then profits from by selling. People pay him for the privilege to put the Trump name on their buildings, right? So it's a different business model. And like Nike, the argument I make in No Logo is that you can't understand this phenomenon without understanding the age in which it rises up, right? It's parallel to the rise of neoliberal economics and the fact that many of the institutions from which we used to get our group identity, our sense of belonging, which is very important to us humans, were under attack, under assault by the neoliberal project, which was telling us all we were is consumers, that everything public and communal was suspect and was under attack in various ways, right? So then the companies come back and sell us that idea of belonging, that need for belonging through shopping. But of course, we don't ever really get it, right? I mean, when we get the running shoes, we don't get transcendence, and when we get the laptop, we don't get revolution. And so we have to shop some more. So it's a perfect formula for capitalism because it keeps us in a constant state of need, right? Of unfulfilled need. And that's fabulous. That's economic growth. That keeps the cycle going. But in order to really embody an idea, if what you're selling is a latte or a laptop or a running shoe or a golf club membership, what you need to do is co-brand with something else in the culture. You need to devour something else in the culture that actually does embody those things, right? So that's why Nike needed to co-brand with Michael Jordan and needed to co-brand with all of, every professional sports league in the world, right? Well, Donald Trump's brand is being the boss, being the all-powerful boss who's so rich that he's living this dream of absolute freedom and impunity. That is what the dream he is selling, okay? And that's always been what he's selling. And it's a particularly seductive dream, once again, in the era of neoliberalism, when more and more people are leading precarious lives and the world is cleaving more and more into this society of losers and winners, right? So you better make sure you're a winner. So Trump's brand has always been about saying, give me money, buy my book, or pay for this fake university, Trump University, or become a contestant on The Apprentice, and I will turn you into a winner. That's the promise of all of his products. And so that's the dream, that he can, when he said on that Access Hollywood tape, that they let you do it, right? If you're a celebrity, that in this age where people feel so disempowered, he had this absolute freedom, right? And so he has co-branded with the US government. And in a way, the US government's brand is also impunity, right? Absolute power, world's biggest military, makes the rules, breaks the rules, signs a climate agreement, breaks the climate agreement, creates the International Criminal Court, won't send its people to the International Criminal Court. I mean, it's kind of a perfect synergy, right? Trump and US empire. And the parts of the US government that in any way compromise with that or soften that idea of impunity, he's doing away with, right? So they're firing diplomats right, left, and center. They're not interested in the parts of foreign policy that are not just about the military. And he surrounds himself with generals and so on. So this is the hollow brand, nuclear armed, yeah.
But actually, it's not just an episode with one character, with Trump. Actually, you mentioned that it's a global corporate coup with this election. Could you describe why?
Right, so there's the Trump brand, right? And then there's this other brand that he created called Make America Great, MAGA. And it has, baseball hats and it provides this sense of belonging. It's not a joke. He really is creating this kind of tribe, a sense of belonging, this team around this idea of restoring this nostalgic idea of America, of pure dominance, particularly seductive to white men who feel that their status is being taken from them, right? In order to sell that product, it actually is not a completely hollow product. There were some very specific things attached to it, including bringing back well-paying jobs, bringing back fossil fuel jobs, bringing back factory jobs, bringing back jobs that paid a middle-class salary, protecting healthcare, protecting Social Security. He ran a very anti-neoliberal campaign. Being so rich that he didn't need to take money from Goldman Sachs. He was free from the influence of other corporations because he was so rich. That was his ridiculous sales pitch. And that he was actually going to clean up Washington because he knew how corrupt it was from the inside, right? So he did make that pitch. I mean, he mixed it up with racism. He mixed it up with misogyny. That was not his only pitch, but that was a big part of his pitch. And so he is vulnerable on this because he has staged what I call in the book a corporate coup. What he has done is so diametrically opposed to what he ran on in economic terms, right? He immediately turns around, appoints this cabinet of billionaires and multimillionaires, 5 former Goldman Sachs executives after attacking Hillary Clinton and Ted Cruz for being in the pocket of Goldman Sachs. He has lobbyists running the government at every level. He has the former CEO of Exxon running the State Department. I mean, it's beyond parody in terms of the clash between what he campaigned on and what he's doing, including denying people health care, including attacking people's Social Security. This tax plan that they've just introduced, which is a huge giveaway to corporate America, is going to create another very large hole in the budget. There's the debating about how big a hole it is. Is it 1.5 trillion or is it 5 trillion? Whatever it is, it's going to have to be paid for with more cuts, right? To the people who elected him, impacting those people directly. So this is why I say it's a corporate coup, because what he is doing is so different from what he campaigned on.
And facing this massive celebrity with Trump, some people say that the only solution would be to have other celebrities, such as Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, or Oprah Winfrey. But you are quite critical about this approach.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, what I try to do in the book is sort of map a few of the roads that led to Trump, right? And I think one of the roads that led us to this really absurd situation where Trump could stand before American voters and say, sure, I have absolutely no experience in government. I have no idea, what I'm doing, but vote for me because I am a billionaire. And because I made so much money in real estate, that means that I can transfer that knowledge to government. That was his pitch. It was very simple. And so what I think it's important for us to understand is that this equation of great wealth, often ill-gotten wealth, with great wisdom in all areas, is not an idea that Donald Trump pioneered. It's an idea that if we're looking, for its roots, I think Bill Clinton played a pretty significant role in it through the Clinton Global Initiative, which was this sort of quasi-UN. It was like people would say that the Clinton Global Initiative had become more important than the UN General Assembly, and there would be this parade of billionaires, including Mark Zuckerberg and Richard Branson, who I wrote about extensively in This Changes Everything. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they would all get together and sort of volunteer to fix the world's problems, and with very little accountability. The case that I write about in This Changes Everything is when Richard Branson went to the Clinton Global Initiative and announced that he was going to spend all of the profits from his airlines and transportation businesses to solve climate change. And he was going to spend $10 billion to solve climate change. And this was heralded as the single greatest act of philanthropy in history. He was on every single talk show. He was, the greatest hero of all time. And I looked into it, and he spent the tiniest fraction of the money. Meanwhile, he massively expanded his airline fleet, his carbon-spewing airline fleet, in the intervening years. But the point being that we used to think of these as problems that we solve together as citizens through our democracies, and now Bill Gates has more power over global health, over pandemics and African agriculture than the World Health Organization, than the FAO, because of the money he spends. And also, there's this expertise issue. Like, he knows a lot about software, but why do we assume he knows so much about African agriculture? Why do we assume he knows so much about public education? He has an insane amount of influence. So, no, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is the answer to the problem of Donald Trump. I think he's a symptom of the same problem, and that is fundamentally a crisis of democracy. And once again, I don't think this is just an American phenomenon. I mean, even if we think about the COP that was held in Paris a couple of years ago, I mean, we had that same parade of the prospect that the billionaires are going to solve this for us through some technological fix.
For the moment, the design of our democracy is based on election. And so there is this question of popularity and populism. Mm-hmm. You were in favor of Bernie Sanders. Could you describe why you decided to support Bernie, and what is your position around popularity and populism?
Well, I mean, I think this phrase populism means very different things in very different contexts. Like, there's a very progressive history of populism in North America. It's not a dirty word the way it is in Europe. So I'm not sure it's the most helpful word if we all mean different things by it. Like, I think I believe in democracy, so I'm not suspicious of things that are popular, right? And just because they're popular. And I didn't support Bernie because he was popular. I was surprised by how popular Bernie was. I was surprised and delighted because this was a truly surprising turn of events for those of us, who've been on the left for a long time, to see this man, a democratic socialist, a self-described democratic socialist in the most capitalist country on earth. And when Bernie, I've known Bernie for years, and when we were on a panel together shortly before he announced, and it was clear that he was, going this route, and we all thought, well, good for Bernie, this will be interesting, he'll get some issues on the agenda. We never imagined that he would win 22 states, that he would win 13 million votes, that he would have rallies of, 10,000 people. It was an absolute phenomenon, and it was very important because we spend a lot of time talking about the frightening things that are happening on the right side of the political spectrum in this country, in Germany, all over the place, and there are very frightening things happening with the normalization of ideas, the growing acceptability of ideas that would have been unsayable just a few years ago. And they're also impacting the centrist parties. And we're seeing that in the abhorrent treatment of refugees in Europe, with centrist parties responding to the far right in ways that, taking positions that we would have only attributed to the very far right just a couple of years ago. But there's also something happening on the left side of the spectrum, if you'll forgive the left-right dichotomy. I know that's very passé. Where ideas that would have been, seen as completely marginal, like to say in the U.S., free college tuition, that would have been like an outrageous idea. But Bernie ran on that idea, also erasing debt for college students. He also ran on a campaign to get to 100% renewable energy very quickly, to have no new fossil fuel leases on federal lands, which I know is a debate that's happening now in France. It's even more significant in the United States because it's a major fossil fuel producer. What else? Universal public health care, and all of these ideas that during the neoliberal era were considered unsayable were particularly for millennials. They were hearing many of these ideas for the first time, and they just thought, this sounds great. So the campaign picked up all of this momentum. It was not a perfect campaign. I'm proud to have supported Bernie. I think he did something absolutely remarkable. But he didn't win. He didn't win the primaries. And the reason he didn't win the primaries, there were many reasons, and we're learning more every day about the extent to which the Hillary Clinton's campaign controlled the Democratic Party. But ultimately, Bernie didn't win because he didn't have a message that resonated with enough people of color and women who were not millennials. His base among young people was diverse and strong, and it was women and men, and it was blacks and Latinos and white people. But when it came to older generations, many people believed that Bernie thought economics solves everything. And Bernie reminded people of every white guy Marxist who just said, first we'll have the revolution and then we'll worry about your petty little things. Even though actually I don't think that is Bernie, but we've all had experiences with that guy. And there was not enough of a holistic analysis that really showed how particularly race has been used as a wedge to divide people in the United States, not just the United States, but at every point at which there would have been a winning progressive coalition. And there is a history to be told that is absolutely coherent about the centrality of racism, and I believe misogyny as well, in the capitalist experience in the United States. This is an economy that was founded on stolen people and stolen land, right? It doesn't need to be an add-on. It is foundational. So this thing of, we'll add the part about race afterwards, or we'll add the part about gender afterwards. It doesn't have to be that way. And the big lesson that I took away from the Bernie campaign is that we can win. If we do this right, and we build a truly diverse movement, and that does not mean building a white movement and then going, where are all the people of color? Let's go reach out to them. It means actually building a diverse movement from the very beginning, and lifting up the voices of the most marginalized in society. Then we can win, because the people Bernie didn't reach are not more right-wing than Bernie. And so I found actually that really transformational to understand, and it's why I'm not hopeless.
Thank you, Naomi. Before exploring how we will win, thanks to this sequence, we understand how we get here. Now, how can we prepare ourselves to the next with Trump? He refused first the climate accord of Paris, his intention with North Korea, a lot of shocks. What from the shock doctrine can we take to prepare ourselves to next trauma or chaos?
Well, to be honest, one of the things that really spurred me to write the book as quickly as I did is I really wanted the book to be out in the United States before there was a major external crisis. And I think Trump is a crisis in and of himself, and there's the daily shocks of his Twitter feed. But what I'm really concerned about is that his policies make external shocks more likely, right? He's deregulating the financial sector. That makes another crash like 2008 more likely. So what would the configuration of characters around him do, like those 5 former Goldman Sachs executives, what would they do to exploit a financial crisis? That's a pretty chilling thought. So we need to not be surprised by that. We need to be able to see it coming. One of the things I wrote about was what people in his administration did during Hurricane Katrina, like Pence, who played an absolutely central role in pushing for the privatization of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Now we're seeing them do the same thing in Puerto Rico, pushing for privatization of the electricity system and the road system. And, Puerto Rico is a beautiful island with a lot of valuable real estate. You can imagine what a guy like Trump, who makes his living off of luxury resorts, would like Puerto Rico to be, right? And this is the real fear, is that the situation in Puerto Rico is so dire that people are being forced to leave. And as the island becomes depopulated, it's very hard for people to protect their interests, as was the case in New Orleans. But I think people are prepared, people are responding so much quicker. We already got the contract canceled. They handed out this corrupt contract to a politically connected company called Whitefish to rebuild the electricity grid. This is a company with no experience with this kind of thing, and there was so much pushback that ended up being canceled. One of the things that really spurred me, what I was going to say to write the book, was the experience actually of having been in this city just days after the horrific terrorist attacks, and being here for the weeks afterwards during COP21, and watching the Hollande government ban protests and declare the state of emergency, and then seeing the state of emergency extended and extended. And obviously the double standards for where the state of emergency was imposed, right? Banning political protests, but not, Christmas markets and sporting events and the very types of events that had been targeted, right? So after Trump tried to impose the travel ban the first time, and there were those amazing protests at the airports, right? We all saw that, and I think took a lot of heart from seeing the way people poured out of their homes, immediately went to the airports, stood with the people who were being detained, and that encouraged local politicians and lawyers and judges to show up, and eventually the court struck down the travel ban. But all I could think about was, if there was a terrorist attack in the United States, they would ban those protests, right? And the courts would not have this courage. And so I really wanted to raise that alarm, because I think that the more we see this stuff coming, the less time we spend in shock, the more we're able to respond, So one of the things I do in the book is give examples of societies that did see it coming, were able to read the signs, did flood the streets when states of emergency were declared from Argentina to Spain, and were able to repel these types of cynical shock doctrine attempts to seize people's rights in those moments of trauma and panic. Climate, one of the things that one of the most heartening moments, I think, of the first few months of Trump's administration was when he announced that he was pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord because he was elected by the people of Pittsburgh, not the people of Paris. Do you remember that? And then the next day, the mayor of Pittsburgh, who's a very progressive guy, pointed out that the people of Pittsburgh had voted for Hillary Clinton. And then he pledged to get Pittsburgh to fossil-free, 100% fossil-free by 2035, which is one of the most ambitious targets in the country. And I think that response exactly embodies how we all need to respond to Trump, right? I mean, yes, a very dangerous cast of characters controls some very powerful levers, but they do not control everything, right? And precisely because they are so powerful, we all need to do so much more in all of the spaces that they don't control, whether that's cities and states not controlled by Republicans in the United States, or whether it is cities outside the United States like Paris, or sovereign countries outside of the United States. I mean, we can either respond to him in this, well, you know, I'm better than Trump, look at the great meme I sent out, right? And just sort of doing the absolute bare minimum to benefit from being better than Trump. Or we can actually get real and get serious in response to this threat and do a whole lot more than we were doing before Trump, right? And that's what the mayor of Pittsburgh did. And frankly, I see something similar even in this outpouring of the Me Too outpouring and the ways in which women and men are responding to sexual assault and sexual harassment and rampant sexism in our workplaces, in our organizations, in our neighborhoods, in our communities of friends, in our families, you know. I think part of what's going on is like we know we can't control everything, and there is a sexual predator, or a guy who brags about being a sexual predator in the White House, and that is something that for now can't be controlled, but that does not mean that this has to give license to this behavior. And in fact, it is possible for us to rise to this occasion and demand more from ourselves. And I think there's a lot of that happening in really inspiring ways, although it's tremendously difficult.
So thank you to move to this, because actually we discussed a little about politics, economics, social issues. And here you are talking about values, about culture, behaviors. Crises and shocks are good ingredients for dystopian literature or dystopian movies, talking about the future with fear. You were mentioning in your book about a crisis of imagination. Could you describe more?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, well, first of all, I should say that I see Trump as dystopian art. Like that's the way I think we should see him, not as a shock, but just like, you know, it's what dystopian art is supposed to do, right? Present us with an exaggerated, grotesque version of our world in the future, right? That sort of, it looks like us, but worse, right? Like a lot worse. And then you look at it in horror and say, no, I don't want that. I'm going to change. That's why artists make dystopian art, not to give us a roadmap of where we should go, but to warn us that if we stay on this road, this is where we'll end up, right? And so I mean, I think we can metabolize Trump as dystopian art and respond in that way. But one of the things that I worry about is that there is such a mania for dystopian fiction as a response to Trump. That, you know, the bestseller lists were crowded with these dystopian classics like 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale. And I had felt long before that one of the problems we have is that we can't imagine a future that isn't dystopian. That we face this, that we are in this endless tape loop where we're constantly imagining and reimagining different variations on the same theme that casts our near future as one of unavoidable ecological collapse, unavoidable massively deepened inequality where there's a tiny group of winners and hordes of locked out losers, you know, whether it's the Hunger Games or Children of Men or Elysium or pretty much any, you know, like Hollywood sci-fi movie you could list, although I love Children of Men, I shouldn't put it in that category. And Alfonso Cuarón says it's not about the future, it's right now. The future is unevenly distributed, is what Alfonso says. It's already here, depending on where you live. But so I think what the greatest success of neoliberalism is not the policies that it managed to export in all of our countries, but really the success of the war on the imagination embodied in Margaret Thatcher's famous phrase that there is no alternative, and underlined by Francis Fukuyama's End of History, right? That there is nothing outside of the bleak borders of neoliberalism, and this represents indeed the end point of human evolution. And that was a ravaging of our collective imagination. And this is why, I called the book No Is Not Enough, because I think part of the reason why the movements that I've been a part of, my first book was called No Logo, and so many of the movements that I've been a part of, though not all of them, have been very good at saying no, enough, drawing the line, whether it is against pipelines or whether it is against terrible free trade deals or whether it is against brutal austerity programs. But when it came to actually articulating the world after we win, the world we want, we have been less good at that. When I wrote the shock doctrine, I really did believe that just saying no to these brutal opportunistic tactics would be enough to stop them. When Alfonso Cuarón made the short film to go with the shock doctrine, the slogan was, information is shock resistance, arm yourselves. Like, we thought that if we just understood the way this tactic worked, people would expose it and resist it. But that book came out in 2007, and then the 2008 financial crisis happened, and then we all said no, and particularly in Europe, people occupied squares for months and resisted with tremendous courage. But often it was just the no, and it was not the and then what. And in fact, I had an argument with Alexis Tsipras where he told me that no was enough. And I was sort of making the argument that I thought that Greece should seize this moment to put forward a much more radical vision for a different kind of economy that was grounded in ecological economics, that was connecting the dots between climate change and the refugee crisis and inequality. And he really said this is a moment of rejection. And I really do believe that that mindset is part of what has kept us in this place. So, I think the good news is that young people today, who came of age post-2008 never got the ideological hard sell that my generation got and that yours got. And I think they're freer to imagine that another world is actually doable.
Thank you. My last two questions. I keep this perspective of methodology of dystopian and utopian scenario. This year we had another strong demonstration with the Black Snake in Standing Rock. Mm-hmm. What could we keep from the Native Amerindian tradition, wisdom, and concrete riot over there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a lot to learn, and that I think the resistance against that pipeline is a really wonderful example of a movement that that had to say no. And we I'm not saying that no is unnecessary. I mean, we are up against incredibly dangerous forces, and we have to resist them. Whether it is Nazis in the streets, or whether it is oil pipelines that cannot be built if we are going to have a chance at a safe planet, or the treatment of refugees in Europe right now. I mean, this needs a no. But we have to find a way where in our resistance we are pivoting somewhere else, somewhere safer. Because if we win every one of these defensive battles, then the best case scenario is we end up exactly where we are. And that is not good enough. That's not good enough. So in Standing Rock, I happened to be there when they won this really major victory against the pipeline, when Obama denied the permit. And it was really wonderful because immediately, people didn't waste any time just celebrating and saying we won. The very next sentence was, okay, now we have to turn Standing Rock into a beacon of the next economy, 100% renewable, agroecological, and rooted in Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. Those camps, in many ways, were, I think, for a lot of people, a kind of a school where people were exposed. A lot of people were exposed. A lot of non-Indigenous people were exposed to a worldview that is different from the one they grew up with, that we grew up with, and I happen to think is our only hope of moving from this extractive economy, which extracts endlessly from the earth and endlessly from workers and endlessly from communities as if there is no consequence, to a society that is based on caretaking and regeneration, the duty to take care when you to take care of the cycles of regeneration in our own bodies, in our communities, in the natural world. And I think we caught a glimpse of that in that Indigenous-led movement. And the truth is, you see it in every Indigenous-led movement that I've ever been privileged to be a part of. So I think that's an example of the no and the yes woven together. But I think our challenge now is really one of connecting the dots between so many different issues, because I do think we've made a lot of progress in a lot of our spaces of getting beyond just the no, just the resistance. I mean, I know that you know from your work in agriculture that there's been that it's well beyond the just anti. There's a vision for how things should work and lots of living examples of it, right? And the climate movement more and more is a movement that is fighting for 100% renewable energy, fighting for community-controlled renewable energy, fighting for climate justice so that the people who have had their lands ravaged by extraction, who have had the dirtiest industries in their backyard, are the first to own and control their own renewable energy. So this is, the foundation of the climate justice movement. What I think we're still not good enough at is getting out of our silos, out of our issue silos. And this is another one of the legacies of neoliberalism, is that we tend to think in issues instead of really having a picture of the world, We're very compartmentalized. So that's my obsession, is like, how do we break down these silos?
Thank you. In the Native American tradition, there is this mantra, Mitakuye Yasin, which means we are all one, we are all connected. There is a prophecy from Canada, the Anishinaabe prophecy of the seven fire, which says that one day when the earth will go very, very in a mess, a new kind of warrior, the rainbow warrior, will come, show up, peaceful warrior, unlighted warrior, with 360.org or with the leap. Somehow you are also a new kind of warrior. Could you describe how work the LEAP manifesto and 350.org? And how can we be peaceful warrior ourselves?
Well, I would just say I actually live on Anishinaabe territory. I'm a guest on an Anishinaabe territory. So the Anishinaabe warriors are the Anishinaabe warriors where I live. The LEAP manifesto and the book with the chapter on this experiment that I was a part of, I talked about it the last time I was in Paris. Maybe some of you heard me talk about it. Right now, as we meet, there's a meeting in Los Angeles to have a LEAP Los Angeles, where they're rewriting the manifesto. It's led by a city councilor. Another radical city. Even in polluted Los Angeles, there's a city councilor who's decided that Los Angeles should get to 100% renewable energy very, very quickly, using some of the money that they're getting because they have the Summer Olympics, and they have a lot of money coming in to spend on infrastructure. He read the LEAP manifesto and realized that this is a discussion that cannot just be left to environmentalists, that Indigenous people have to be in the room, that immigrant communities have to be in the room, that justice has to be baked in. And so they're having their meeting. I'm sort of stressed about it right now, because when we had our first meeting a couple of years ago in Canada, it's such hard work, honestly, to get in a room of people who where there's real differences, to have Greenpeace and the union representing oil workers in the same room. It's hard. There are hard conversations that happen. With the LEAP, I think the LEAP is a short people's manifesto. It's 1,400 words. I included the text at the end of the book, but you can also read it online. You can go to theleap.org. and see different examples of what we call the living leap. So trade unions that have taken it and reimagined their workplaces with it, or a city council, a group of people who are running for city council on a platform that was inspired by the Leap Manifesto. It's a vision for caring for the earth and for each other, radical caretaking. Part of what, in addition to that climate justice element, which we call for, we also call for a total redefinition of what a green job is, what a climate job is, that it's not only the wonderful jobs that we can create in renewable energy and public transit and energy efficiency, it's also repairing the damage we've done to the land. And it's also the work of care, which is overwhelmingly done by women, caring for kids, caring for the elderly, teaching, the work that really strengthens our communities and that is under relentless attack by austerity. This is actually low carbon work that rarely gets recognized as low carbon work. So this is what the Leap Manifesto is, and there's a big piece on migration as well. And it just came out of this attempt to dream together, having a very broad coalition and doing something we'd never done before, which is trying to picture the world after we win and to write it down. And it's really about a different story, because I think we have a lot of examples of coming together and making lists, like just a list of policies that we want. And I think that our crisis is deeper. Our crisis is one of narrative, that we have a culture that is based on this taking and then throwing away, whether we're treating the earth like garbage or whether we're treating people like garbage and throwing them away in prisons or refugee camps. And what we need is a culture where no one and nowhere is thrown away. No one is garbage. Nowhere is garbage. This is another way of talking about the circular economy, but it's really, it's an economy based on cherishing. And so that's what the Leap is, and we have tools on our website for anybody who wants to start a local Leap group. More than anything, I think it's about not waiting for politicians to lead us. It's about coming up with our non-negotiables and then saying to any politician that wants to call themselves a populist that they need to follow the people. Yeah.
Just before listening to the people, I would like to explore a few seconds of silence and attention of the gift that you offer to us tonight. Thank you for this. And we will have 25 minutes for questions, reactions, comments. So, could you raise your hand if you have yet a question, in order that we can manage it? Okay, so like 10 questions. If okay, we will take 3 questions in a row and 1 answer. Let's try to be sharp in order that we could enjoy the biodiversity of reactions.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about refugees, particularly about the DACA program. I wanted to know what is happening in the United States about it. Is it cancelled or is it still on? And I know that in France the situation is also quite dramatic, but I really wanted to know what was happening in the United States and what you think also about the fact that we are kind of in every country in Europe treating illegally isolated foreign minors and putting them into illegal establishments. And in France it's happening right now. So I wanted to know what you were thinking about it.
Thank you. We'll take a second question.
Very short question. If you had to make a prediction on whether or not Trump is going to make it to the end of his mandate, what would it be and why?
Thank you. And last question for this row.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I have two very short questions. The first one is that you talk a lot about renewable, but you haven't used the word less at all, less energy rather than more renewable energy. The second question is, it took over 150 years for the working class movement to organize, as you know, and it took about 10 years for neoliberalism to dismantle those structures. You talk about reorganizing and reorganization, but what do you propose concretely in terms of reorganization? And do you think that social entrepreneurship can fill that sort of gap and void, whereas it also thrives on neoliberal liberal structures? So there's an ambiguity here.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have 4 questions. We have one about migrants, one about the final mandate, the final episode of the mandate of Trump, the question about less energy, and the last one is how to put into the design and the new design social enterprise.
Those are all great questions. I think I'll work backwards from the last one. The less energy is a very good point. I didn't say it, but I do write it, and I stand corrected, because it is absolutely true that we have to consume less. Not just less energy, but less stuff. We need to contract those parts of our economy that are just based on consumption, mindless consumption. Obviously, there are lots of people that need to consume more because they don't have enough, but we also have a culture that is based on overconsumption, and we can't dodge that discussion. But this is also part of why I think we have to talk about the parts of our economy that we can expand, right? We can expand the arts, we can expand the caring professions, we can expand those sectors that actually make us happier and are not just about endlessly feeding that void created by the hollow brand.
And actually, in the LEAP paradigm, it's about happier context. Huh? It's not just
exactly.
reduce.
Yeah, and it's and you know, one of I think the one of the dots that we need to connect is that there is an epidemic of despair, depression, that has a lot to do with disconnection from our communities, disconnection from one another. We're social creatures. We're spending a lot of time alone staring at screens. Disconnection from nature, disconnection from the things that nourish us, and we need a process of reconnection, which is going to make us happier, and also going to be good for the planet. So what's good for us is good for the planet. It's always good to remember that. Social entrepreneurs, look, I mean, I think that there is a role for social entrepreneurs, absolutely, and I think there's been some, amazing innovations that make the dream of 100% renewable possible, and a lot of things. I don't believe it is all about the market solving this for us and lowering prices. I think we're also benefiting from the German and Chinese government making massive investments in renewables, but there's no doubt that there's also been some very important market innovation that I think is a key part of the transition. I just don't think it can lead it. But I think it has a role.
Professor Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize 2006, is organizing a party tomorrow at 6 p.m. Next year. Have you been invited to discuss about social entrepreneurs?
No,
Not
but
yet.
I don't usually get invited to social.
She is, okay.
Well, I just got invited. So, the question about Trump and the end of his mandate, here's the truth. I don't know. I think it is something that, I'm glad that he is being investigated by Robert Mueller. I'm glad that it seems to be a very thorough investigation and a very serious investigation. But I feel like there's too much political energy that is spent in the United States. I mean, it doesn't really matter what we do here in this room, but I think there's too much political energy spent in the United States just sort of hoping for impeachment, right? Hoping he will not make it to the end of his term. for one reason or another, right? Whether he sees impeachment coming, so he quits, or he actually stays and gets impeached. No U.S. president has ever been impeached. Nixon quit before he could be impeached. And so I think we have to prepare for the most likely outcome. And the most likely outcome is not only does he last out his term, but he runs again, okay? And this is why it is very important not to waste serious political energy. Let Robert Mueller do his job, right? What the rest of us need to do, so I'm speaking for us in North America, is have a political strategy to beat Trump in the next election, okay? And I am worried that that is not happening. Because the election campaign can't be elect Democrats so we impeach Trump. That is a negative campaign, and that is exactly what didn't work the last time around when Hillary ran a campaign, a lot of which was about how dangerous Trump is, right? So I think there has to be a platform that speaks to the fact that people feel politics is failing them. A lot of people express that by raising the middle finger and voting for Trump, but 90 million Americans express that by staying home, right? So people need something to vote for. And I think what we saw in the UK with Corbyn's campaign was really encouraging, because Corbyn's poll numbers were absolutely terrible. The whole election was called just to wipe Labour out for a generation. It was a completely unnecessary election. And it ended up having this incredibly surprising outcome. The Tories lost their majority, and Labour picked up more votes than they did in any election since the Second World War. And what happened is not that Jeremy Corbyn suddenly became this incredibly charismatic politician. What happened is they came out with a manifesto that spoke to people's actual needs, that mapped out a future, that excited people, and they managed to galvanize a lot of people who don't usually vote, right? And that's the kind of thing that I think needs to happen if Trump is not going to win a second term. That's what I'm worried about, not whether he's going to last out this term. I'm worried about him getting a second term for real, okay? And that is where the no yes comes in, right? And you know, and I think there's something really exciting going on with healthcare, right? Where the Republicans have tried to repeal Obamacare, and in response to this, there has been a groundswell in the United States, the largest movement in my lifetime, demanding single-payer universal health care. So saying not only are you not going to dismantle Obamacare, but we're going to demand something better than Obamacare, because the truth is that Obamacare was not good enough, and it had huge giveaways to the insurance industry, and it was vulnerable to these types of attacks. DACA is another example of this, right? Where DACA is the program, for those of you who don't know, that gave temporary protection, allowed young people to work in the United States on the basis that it was young immigrants, that it was not their fault that they were illegal, because their parents had brought them to the United States when they were young, okay? So the whole discourse around DACA is good immigrant versus bad immigrant. And it pits young people against their parents in a way that's really cruel. That's really, really cruel. And it implies that somehow their parents did something terrible by trying to bring their families to safety for whatever the reason it was, whether economic, ecological, military. And so we're seeing a lot of this, and the answer to your question is that DACA is still uncertain. It's very much in limbo, so there's no simple answer to that question. But what's been really moving to me is watching these young people who are DACA recipients who've benefited from this program. They call themselves dreamers, getting arrested, opposing the attacks on DACA, but then saying, DACA is not good enough, in the same way that Obamacare is not good enough. We want our parents to be legal. We want our whole families to be legal. We're going for status for all, right? And this is the kind of no, but we want better stance that I think we need to see in many different areas. And young immigrants in the United States are leading on this in incredibly courageous ways, taking huge risks in the process. You asked about what's happening in Europe with migrants, which is a pretty huge question. I'm very disturbed by what's happening. I'm particularly disturbed by this increasing trend of trying to force migrants back into extremely unsafe situations, working with repressive regimes to send people essentially to concentration camps, which is pretty much what Australia has done. And right now there's an uprising on Manus Island as we speak, which is one of these island detention or concentration camps that the Australian government has put in place through this policy of intercepting the boats and sending people directly. And I think Europe is increasingly going in this direction. And I think it violates international law on multiple fronts, and it's an atrocity. It's an atrocity.
Thank you, Naomi. Do we have other questions? I will move to this side this time.
Hello, thank you very much for your work. I was wondering, according to you, what is the top 3 action to maximize our impact on our resilience and protecting the environment?
Thank you.
To maximize our impact to protect the environment, sorry for the micro, and our resilience, our political action, etc.
At an individual level?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for tonight. It's become more and more obvious how corrupt the political system is today by the Neoliberalism corporations. So my question is, how do we lead resistance without breaking the rules, without civil disobedience? Can it really work if we have to follow the rules, if the rules are not made for us and by us?
Thank you. So 2 last one. Yep.
Just to sum up, we have economical crisis, refugee camp or concentration camps. We also have a lot of problem with the politics and democracy. Doesn't remind you of something at the beginning of the 19th century or the 20th century? Do you think it's plausible that there will be another Third World War?
Thank you. Somehow, thank you, sorry.
As economists and mostly as human, what do you think about our presidents who want to take the climate leadership when his action is not in harmony with his word?
En français.
En français, pardon. Que pensez-vous comme en tant qu'économiste et surtout en tant que personne humaine vivant sur cette terre, que pensez-vous de notre président qui proclame et souhaite avoir le leadership climatique alors que dans ses actes, il continue à financer le fossile, à sucrer les subventions pour le bio, tout ça, bref. Signe le CETA.
Merci. So we have 4 questions about individual autonomous. Comment on redevient résilient à un niveau individuel? Comment est-ce que on peut faire sans désobéir civilement?
Okay, I'm going to try to be speed round. So I think if we're talking about lowering our individual carbon footprint, the most important thing you could not do is what I did to get here, which is fly. And it's pretty important not to eat meat as well to lower your carbon footprint. You live in a city with great public transit, so you should use it. And there are lots of other things that we can do as individuals. And many of those things will make us healthier if we walk more, if we bike more, and if we eat less meat, be healthier, right? But I would just say that we can't mistake those individual things that lower our carbon footprint for actually being solutions to the climate crisis at this late stage in the game. That if we're serious about meeting the targets that our government set in Paris, which, you know, are actually pretty scary. We've warmed the planet by 1 degree, and look at what we have just seen with hurricanes, record-breaking superstorms, forest fires around the world, and that's 1 degree, and we said we're going to keep temperatures below 2 degrees or make best efforts to 1.5, right? So if we're going to do that, we have to do a lot more than any of our governments are saying, right? So this is something we can't do without policy. But I would say join your friends at 350 you know, block any attempts to expand fossil fuel infrastructure, because that is absolutely incompatible with any of the pledges made in Paris. But we also need to fight for policy solutions that are the yes. So yeah, I would just say there are lots of individual things we can do, but the individual stuff is not going to get us there. On civil disobedience, I mean, I do believe that that civil disobedience has always played a very important role in any serious movement for social change. I don't believe in violence. I believe in nonviolent civil disobedience, and I also believe in accountable civil disobedience. And I think that it's very important for people who decide to take that step to really interrogate who they're accountable to and who they're putting at risk, because there are definitely examples of people sort of just deciding with 3 friends that they're going to do something, and then the implications of that decision are felt by people who are much more vulnerable. And so I would say I believe in accountable nonviolent civil disobedience, but I do believe it's indispensable. Are we starting a 3rd World War? Look, I mean, I think Trump is doing his best, you know, tweeting threats of nuclear annihilation. And I do think that, you know, we need to be ready, and we need to connect the dots between so many of the crises we face, including the fact that so much of the migration that is happening now, the forced migration, is blowback from illegal wars that many of our governments participated. Maybe not your government. My government did. And so I don't really know how to answer the question about, you know, I mean, do I actually think it's going to happen? I think we need to be prepared. We need to rebuild an anti-war movement, which we haven't had for a while. But it can't be the same kind of anti-war movement that doesn't connect the dots between climate change, between migration, between inequality. It has to be much more holistic. We live in this time of multiple overlapping crises. So we cannot be single issue in anything we do. We have to have a holistic vision in everything we do, right? We can't play my crisis is bigger than your crisis, whether it's climate change or nuclear annihilation or fighting racism and misogyny. It's all a 5-alarm fire, okay? If you are on the front lines, it's a 5-alarm fire. So we just can't. Macron.
How to help him? How to help him to be consistent with everything?
Look, I mean, one thing, a couple of things I would just say about Macron. I think I am very alarmed by the way in which the last election in France was sort of treated like some kind of great victory for centrism, okay? It was an incredibly frightening outcome. It was incredibly frightening. And to turn around after that election result, after seeing the steady increase of the Front National in this country, to then turn around and create and recreate and deepen precisely the economic conditions under which fascism spreads, which we know historically and which we've seen again and again in country after country after country since 2008, is reckless endangerment, and he needs to be held accountable for this. And when we fight austerity, we're fighting racism. We are. because this is the soil in which fascism spreads. It's not the only, we also have to fight racism directly, but we have to understand the connections. In terms of what he says about the environment, I mean, we're in a similar situation in Canada with Trudeau, right? Where he's really great with the messaging and the memes, you know? And the truth is that's a better situation to be in than the opposite, you know, and of having a leader who doesn't make the claims at all and denies that climate change is real or downplays it. You know, I think that Macron's gone quite far out on a limb on wanting to be seen as a climate leader, and that is a fantastic tool for the climate movement to use, right? I think that if this is the brand he's chosen, hold him to it, and that's much easier to do than what our friends in the United States are up against.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Maybe we have just one space for just one last question. Qui est né le 3 novembre? Est-ce qu'il y a un anniversaire? Non?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very puzzled by the fact that we are all at this very moment using Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and devices that are being built in China by people suffering terrible working conditions. And my question is, how do we get our ideas without using the corporate technological devices and devices that are using fossil fuel energy? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Olivia, there's somebody in the front row who really wanted to say something.
Thank you for your expose. Great. Just great. And I want to know how to fight. How would you fight? How would you fight against fake news, which are like manipulating people first because they stimulate dreams all people have, and how can we be against that? How can we fight?
Thank you. I hope that we will come back to France for a new edition of Up Conference. For these two questions.
Well, I think on fake news, you know, I think the soil in which the fake news grows is a population that hasn't been taught critical thinking. That you know, I think if we continue to underfund education, then this is going to spread even more. So I think supporting education, having particular programs where young people are taught to decode it. I think there are some interesting programs that are emerging which encourages young people to spread their findings and share when they've exposed something. But I also think we need to be regulating these companies more, right? I think that Facebook and Google and Twitter and all of them have had an incredible free ride for a very long time. They've gotten incredibly wealthy, and they, you know, they're going to end up having to be treated like public utilities at a certain point. So I haven't totally figured this out, but I think there is some good thinking that is emerging, and I do think that critical thought can get us part of the way there, but I also think we're going to just need standards in the same way that we have standards about what you can put on television and that you can't, you know, just lie in an advertisement, and that there are ways to lodge a grievance if people are just saying untrue things. I mean, if this is where we're getting our information, we have to have mechanisms. In terms of the devices, I agree with you that it is, you know, I think our relationship to our devices are alarming on many levels. I think that that certainly the labor condition piece of it is alarming, and the built-in obsolescence piece of it is alarming. And this is one area in which we can buy less and not fall for the latest campaign to get us to throw out our old phones. I also think there's things that we can do, I mean, even just like simple things that Europe has done around not, having to get a new charger for every device because they keep changing them, right? I mean, we tend to assume that there's nothing we can do to tackle built-in obsolescence in the technology sector, that we just have to let them do it, but I'm not sure that is true. But I also think that, I end the book, as you know, Olivier, with a passage about how, because Trump is nuclear-armed dystopian art, that we need to see him as a warning. And part of seeing him as a warning is looking inside of ourselves to find our inner Trump. Right? The Trump within. And, I mean, this is a guy who is addicted to Twitter. He can't read, an intelligence brief, let alone a book. He needs to be handed everything in a list, which is basically what our media is turning into, because so many of us seem to need to read everything in lists. So, I mean, he shows these exaggerated forms of so many things that are going wrong in our culture, and one of them is the addiction, to those dopamine hits that we get from these technologies, which also encourage us to attack each other instead of talking to each other, to go nuclear on each other at the first provocation, and also, to see ourselves as brands and curate our lives, our own mini reality TV shows that we're broadcasting from our phones all the time. So I'm not saying, that we should just throw them out the window, although sometimes I think that would be a good idea. But I do think we need a much, much healthier relationship with technology, where we use these incredible tools as tools, including as tools for our movements to get us together very quickly, but to get us in rooms with one another where we can look each other in the eye and develop systems of accountability. Workers in China need trade unions.
Merci, Naomi.
Merci, Olivier.
So, before ending, thank you. Merci d'avoir mentionné aussi ce Trump que je peux avoir à l'intérieur de moi. J'étais particulièrement heureux, fier, honoré d'être à tes côtés, Naomi. Je voudrais saluer, rendre hommage à la détermination et le courage puissant que je vois à l'intérieur de toi, qui savent se combiner avec sagesse et douceur. À la fois une énergie yang et yin, bien ajustée. Merci pour ça. Si jamais vous avez envie d'acheter le livre de Naomi, c'est possible. Il y a grâce à Actes Sud, une séance de dédicace qui est organisée au fond de la salle. Pour que ça se fasse de manière yang et yin, je vous invite à vous mettre en file indienne et à prévoir sur un post-it le nom de la personne pour laquelle vous voulez offrir ce livre. Merci au Palais de la Femme, merci à Hop Conférence, merci à Actes Sud. Très bonne soirée. Nous avons une demi-heure avec Naomi sur le stand de dédicace.